Hey guys, it's Katie. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to share with you all the books I read in the month of January. So I had to check a couple times because I kept looking at my list and I was thinking that I read more books in the month of January, but I read 6, which I still count as really good. For some reason, I just thought I read more books than that. So I read 6 books into total, and I have to say, as an overall review of the month, I didn't think it was. Hold on, there is something in my eye. Did I get it? Oh, this is the worst. So overall, as a review of the month, I didn't think it was a spectacular reading month, not in the fact of trying to qualify the quantity of books I read, but just I didn't feel like I read a lot of books that I was really excited about reading or I felt really good after I read them. So it kind of was a bit of a disappointment for me. I wasn't too crazy about most of the books I read, but we'll just go ahead and we'll get right into talking about all the books I read this month. So I actually realized it was 7 books that I read this month, really 6 because one of them is a DNF, but I still wanted to share the book I didn't finish with you, and that was The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. I'm sure by now you've seen a ton of hype around this. It's been all over Instagram, it's been all over here on YouTube, on booktube channels, and I felt like I was completely on an island on my own with not liking this book because it's gotten a lot of 4 and 5 star reviews. Now, I'm not going to go too much into the plot. I didn't get too much into it. I probably read only 20 pages, but I will tell you what I did not like about the book. That way, if you feel like your reading tastes are similar to mine and this might sound like it's not the book for you, you can just know maybe you don't want to read it. This was actually the first Holly Black book that I picked up. I had wanted to read Dull Bones earlier in the year and just didn't get a chance to get around to it. So this was my first experience with reading her stuff. And basically what I knew at the beginning was that Jude and her 2 sisters were taken to the land of Fairy because their parents were murdered. So in living in this land, they also are treated very poorly because they're humans and humans are looked down upon in the land of Fairy. They're very cruel people. It's a very sad place to be. But what I really didn't care for too much about this book is it was angsty to the point of being annoying. Jude is the main character that we follow throughout this book, and I actually found it very difficult to get invested in the book with her as the main protagonist. I actually really enjoyed the eldest sister, who we didn't see a ton of, or at least in the parts that I read. I just really could not get behind Jude as a character. I found her very annoying and very aggressive for no reason. And it was just not a book that I really enjoyed. I didn't find that the writing or the concept of the book was going to be enough to carry me through, so I decided that I would put it down and just say goodbye to this one. And then next on my list, I read Once and For All by Sarah Dessen. I have been a huge Sarah Dessen fan for so long. I read a bunch of Sarah Dessen when I was in high school, so every few years when she comes out with another book, I immediately go right out to the bookstores and I pick it up in hard copy, which is something I don't do that often because I am very cheap and I would rather buy books in paperback, but Sarah Dessen is my one bookish splurge that I allow, and unfortunately I was really disappointed with Once and For All. So in this book we follow Luna, who is the daughter of a very famous wedding planner, at least in the North Carolina area. She's very invested in helping her mother make all of these weddings a success, but she doesn't particularly believe in happy ever afters. Then she meets this boy named Ambrose, which is pretty much what always happens in every Sarah Dessen book, is there's a girl who meets a boy, and then there is typically some kind of sweet romance that goes with it. So she meets Ambrose and kind of keeps herself at a distance from him. She's a little bit wary of his personality because he's very flirtatious and just kind of lets life come as it may. And for Luna, she went through a very traumatic experience of losing someone that she cared about very dearly, and so for her it's very hard to open up to someone else. Now when I started this book, I was really excited about it. I feel like the stuff that I used to enjoy about Sarah Dessen, books like Keeping the Moon and The Truth About Forever, were not necessarily very deep books, but I felt like they were deeper than what Sarah Dessen writes now, and I got a lot out of them reading them as an adolescent, and I've actually still really enjoyed them reading them as an adult. As we transition more into Sarah Dessen's newer stuff, I find that the plot is not as deep as it is in some of her older works, and I just feel like it's becoming a formula for her stories, and that I wouldn't really be able to differentiate differentiate between one plot to the next. I thought that Once and For All was going to kind of change it. It tipped off at the beginning of the story that there was going to be sort of a serious topic discussed, and then it didn't really go anywhere, that topic that she brought into the story. And then I felt like the way that the book decided to wrap up the ending kind of trivialized the fact that she brought in something really important and then had such a I wish I had a better word to explain it because I don't want to give anything away. Sometimes it's really difficult to do a non-spoiler review and get across what you did and didn't like about a book. But I feel like if you read it, the end trivializes a pretty serious topic that is talked about. I ended up giving this book 2 stars. I did end up finishing this book, and there were definitely aspects of it I enjoyed. It ultimately just fell short for me, and this is probably the 3rd or 4th Sarah Dessen book that has done that. So I'm thinking that it's time for me and SD to part ways. All right, and then the next book that I read that I did actually really enjoy was Girl Waits with Gun by Amy Stewart. I actually ended up reading this for my library's book club that I run, and I was fortunate enough to have a Skype interview with the author for my book club, which was a really fun experience. I really liked this book. It was about a couple of kick-ass ladies that I really enjoyed learning more about. It's based on a true story of one of the first deputies here, female deputies here in the United States. So that was a really interesting aspect about it. In this first book, we follow the 3 cop sisters, Constance, Norma, and Florence. One day they're run down in a buggy by a powerful silk factory owner, and when Constance tries to seek out restitution for the damages, the silk owner, Henry Kaufman, tells her to let it go or he will unleash his gang upon the sisters, which obviously Constance, being the kick-ass lady she is, does not let it go, and so obviously the gang comes to get them. So Constance goes ahead and seeks out justice by contacting the local sheriff, and she kind of teams up with him, and they figure out a way to get back at this guy and to seek justice for it. I absolutely thought this book was completely riveting and so much fun. Even though this book is told from Constance's perspective, I actually thought Norma was so much fun. In this book, you learn that Norma takes care of carrier pigeons, and she's just a very curmudgeon-y character that I totally loved. I would love a shirt that said Team Norma on it. I would be so happy if I had one of those shirts in my life. But this was a really interesting book to read. There's lots of action, lots of adventure. It's obviously a historical fiction novels. There's hints of romance here and there, and this book is a part of a continuing series. I believe 3 of the books are out right now, with a 4th coming in the fall. So if you enjoy a roaring adventure and you like having female role models in your books, I absolutely recommend this one. It was a lot of fun. All right, the next one I read, and I feel so bad about this because I know so many people enjoyed it and it just was not the book for me, and that was The Wedding Date by Jasmine Guillory. Now, this has been one of the highly touted romances of the season, and I was really looking forward to it. I absolutely adore fun, quirky, smart romances. I felt like this book was billed that way, and I ended up feeling like it wasn't quite what it was marketed as. Now, this book is about Alexa Monroe, who one night gets stuck in an elevator with a handsome doctor named Drew. Drew is there to attend a wedding of his best friend and his ex-girlfriend, and he doesn't want to go by himself, so he asks Alexa to go with him, and she says yes. We already have that fake wedding date trope going on, and I was so there for that. I was so excited about it. And so they go to the wedding together, and they find out that they have a lot of chemistry, and that kind of sets off on them seeing if they could take this to another level with some kind of romantic relationship. Now, I can't say I completely hated this book. I obviously finished reading the entire thing. I really enjoyed the fact that we talked about an interracial couple. I don't think we see enough of that, or having African American leads in our books, so I was really happy to see that there was that kind of representation here. However, I found the dialogue to be very corny and unrealistic, and that is my biggest pet peeve with books, is when the dialogue is absolutely unrealistic. I can just sit there and in my head hear that that would never be said out loud in a million years in real life. So I really didn't enjoy that about the book. I also felt like there was a lot of commingling going on in the book, and I'm not a prude, but there was so much commingling going on that I wondered if anything else was going to happen in the book. It was a lot, and I'm not necessarily mad at that. I just kind of wished some other things happened in the book, like maybe some more talking or going somewhere or doing something. It was a lot of someone traveled somewhere and then we had some commingling experiences. The other thing that really bothered me is that I felt like Alexa and especially Drew were immature for their age at some points. Their relationship and the way they thought about their relationship really frustrated me, and I ended up giving this 1 star. The next book I read was a graphic novel, and it was called Pashmina by Nidhi Chayani. I hope I said that right. But this basically is a YA graphic novel about a young girl, Priyanka, who is trying to figure out where she's come from. She now lives in America. Her mother was an immigrant from India, and she has a lot of unanswered questions. She doesn't know about her father, she doesn't know about her family, and she doesn't know anything about her homeland, India. And so one day, Priyanka finds that in a suitcase there is this pashmina scarf, and when she puts it on, she is actually transported to India. Overall, I found this graphic novel pretty enjoyable. I haven't found a ton of graphic novels that I've really gotten invested in, but this one did a pretty good job. I enjoyed it overall. I really loved the transition from Priyanka's real life to being in India. When we were in Priyanka's real life, it was a very muted color palette in grays and blacks and whites, and when we were in India, it was full blossoming color, and I thought that was a really neat way to show when she was in the real world and when she was in the world when she had put the pashmina on. I also thought that it dealt with some difficult topics, and it felt true to the experience of being a teenager, where you're a little more self-involved and inwardly thinking about yourself and perhaps not realizing the difficulties that other people are going through when you're really busy thinking about yourself. So I thought that that was done really, really well. Overall, again, I gave it 3 stars. I thought it was a solid graphic novel. All right, and then next on my list is Big Little Lies by Leanne Moriarty. This was probably my favorite book this month. We follow Madeline, Celeste, and Jane, who are 3 very good friends that all have children in the kindergarten class. I'm getting the TV series and the book confused a little bit. It seems that one of the children is bullying another child and they don't really know who. At the same time, there's also been a murder. We don't know who's been murdered or who did the murdering, and so that is what we're trying to find out throughout the course of this book. This is definitely a fast-paced thriller. I hesitate using the word thriller because it didn't necessarily read like one. For me, the thing I enjoyed the most about Big Little Lies was the exploration into female friendship. I really enjoyed Madeline, Celeste, and Jane's friendship with each other. It was so fun to see them get to know each other better and have each other's backs and learn about and go through these difficult subjects that were going on. Now, the other thing I'll also say is I highly recommend watching the TV series. I did feel like there was some deviation from the book, but I thought it was well done and intentional enough to be warranted when doing the TV series. It was really good. I really enjoyed it, so I highly recommend watching that as well. And I gave this book 5 stars. All right, the last book that I read was also for my library's book club. We ended up having 2 book club meetings this month because we didn't meet in December because of the holidays, obviously. And for our second book for this month, we read Today Will Be Different by Maria Simple. Now, I had not read Where'd You Go Bernadette before reading this book, and I feel like that definitely influenced how I felt about this book because I've had ample conversations with other people about whether they did or didn't like this book and had they read or not read Where'd You Go Bernadette. Now, we follow Eleanor Flood in this book, and she is a graphic artist. She had recently worked on a very popular television show that had since ended, and she lives in Seattle with her husband and child, and she's just kind of a mess. And basically this just takes us through one day of Eleanor Flood's life. Now, I actually really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 stars. I would have given it 5, but the ending kind of took it a little too far for me, but I still thought it was a really, really solid read, and I was very surprised because when I first started the book, I absolutely hated it. I didn't think I was going to like it at all, and it totally surprised me. I don't think Eleanor is a very likable character. She can be very neurotic and annoying at times, but you know what? I found her very relatable because I can admit that I'm definitely not a perfect person, and I could understand where she was coming from at some of the points in the story. I think the other thing about the story is that the overall message was so incredibly relatable because there are so many of us that start out our day thinking today is going to be different and we're going to do everything right and we're going to do everything perfectly and we're going to accomplish everything that we wanted to accomplish, and then our entire day just kind of goes to crap. And that's exactly what happens in this book. And I really loved that message. It was something that was so incredibly relatable to me, and I really enjoyed it for that fact. I definitely plan on reading Where'd You Go Bernadette sometime in the relative future, and I'd be interested to see how I perceive that book, having read that as the second book instead of the first book that came out by Maria Semple. Did that make sense? I'm not sure I just spoke English right now. Alright everyone, that is everything I have for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, make sure you subscribe and click the bell for notifications. You can also find me on social media at Katie Biblio on Twitter, Instagram, and Goodreads. Thanks again so much for watching, and until next time, happy reading!